Okay, maybe we can get started. It's 1:02. We have about 32 people on the bridge, so maybe we can get started. Bang, Judy, Raymond, you guys okay? We can get started. Yep. Okay.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, by all
yes.
means, yeah. Yes,
So
they'll keep coming in. Yeah.
yeah, they'll be joining. So even Net just joined in. Jeanette, so great. Um, Good afternoon, everyone, members and friends of HIMAP. We have our ninth session today. We typically do this on a Friday, but because we're mindful tomorrow is a holiday, we will do it today, so on Thursday. Today, we're thankful we have Deloitte with us, Jet Pampolina and his team, to tell us a little bit more about business continuity management. We realized normally when we talk about business continuity management, many of us understand it to be primarily BCP or business continuity planning. Yes, we get that, but we also understand there are other parts to it, like disaster recovery, crisis management, and it's a little more complex than what we thought, and especially in preparation for COVID-19, a pandemic. I think many of us, especially in the Philippines, were familiar with typhoons, floods, um, earthquakes, even volcanic eruptions. So we're familiar with that. But a pandemic is not something we typically prepare for. I think we should have some very interesting conversations today. I hope Jet will also share with us the experience being the first Filipino COVID-19 case in the Philippines. We learned about um, from Deloitte, if I'm not mistaken. So it would be
Really?
that's going to be a very interesting conversation because how you responded, how you prepared, you were in the middle of all these things while it started, and we were not even on quarantine at that time, right, Jet? So I'd be very interested to learn more about what was done, what were the challenges, and it's something I think many of our members on this call can really appreciate and understand. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Hence, 90 minutes for today's meetings. Um, I Second point I want to bring up is that I think there was a survey that was sent out earlier. I hope our colleagues on the call will respond to that survey just to understand a little bit more, get a little bit of a litmus test to see what get a feel of how respond to the comments. That's how I wanted to get that started. I want to do the honors of introducing our moderator today. So I'm so thankful Ms. May Cuevas is going to moderate for us today's session. So May, you're very familiar with. We were mentioning earlier, she was our undersecretary for the Department of Budget and Management, primarily executive director for procurement. She's also held roles as executive director in the NPC, the National Privacy Commission of the DICT. So where she was there for 5 years or so. But before that, I think there were many aspects in multinational companies you worked with, right? Coca-Cola, not only the bottler, but even the concentrate company, Coca-Cola Export, Nestle, DHL. So brings a lot of experience to the table, bring a lot of experience to our teams here on this call, not only in the Philippines, but in Asia Pacific and in Germany. And so a combination of experience and skill sets May brings to our conversations today. I'm so thankful that May is here to moderate this session for us. Thank you to Judy uh, for your help in having May get us here. Also, May is also an entrepreneur. So that's also another aspect, another dimension for Capstone Solutions. So May is a graduate of the Ateneo de Manila University and also has an MBA for the Asian Institute of Management. She's also a recipient of the Australian Leadership Awards on organizational development. So uh, on that note, I just want to thank you, May, for being here with us today. I'd like to turn the floor over to you, May. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you for that heartwarming introduction as I try to come back to HIMAP as I was a former active member. Anyway, I think just to set the tone for this afternoon's discussions, which is about managing a crisis while you're in it, and as our president Roger mentioned, this is about BCP. But I think let's refer to, if you look at the Chinese word crisis, it's composed primarily of two characters. One represents danger, and the other represents opportunity. And I think for this afternoon, we're really looking at how to maximize and see how we manage that opportunity. So I'll quickly turn over. We have a full afternoon with Jet from Deloitte, and I'd like to, and then we have two esteemed panelists as well who we'll introduce in a while. In the meantime, let's start off with a discussion or a presentation from Deloitte presented by its partner, Jet Pampolina. Or his formal name is Enrique Victor Pampolina, who's the risk advisory partner of Navarro Amper and Company, or Deloitte Philippines. He's had 32 years of professional work experience in the areas of internal audit, enterprise risk management, and business continuity management, covering various industries and sectors. Before his um, appointment as a partner at Deloitte, he was the head of enterprise risk management at Meralco and was also the chief audit executive of multinational companies such as Sun Life Financial and Tower Watson's, covering the Asia Pacific region. He's been an expatriate executive for Indonesian conglomerate Salim and Sinar Mas Groups for 7 years and also worked for SGV in the Philippines. So let's start today's discussions with Jet's presentation. Good afternoon.
Hey, thank you, May, for that introduction. Let's go over my deck now. Well, first of all, I would like to thank HIMAP for giving me the opportunity to talk about something very relevant to us, this is crisis management. And uniquely, we're still very much in a crisis. So my talk, the title of my talk is Crisis Management, Managing a Crisis While You're in It. Because while I will be talking about concepts from a private company perspective, I will be talking about learnings or takeaways from very recent Deloitte surveys, precisely on crisis management. I'll be sharing our own crisis at Deloitte Philippines, having that personal first-hand experience of the first Filipino confirmed positive case. We all understand that it's in the midst of a pandemic that remains to be evolving as we speak. It's very fluid. Uh, we all, as a nation, we hold our bated breath every 4 p.m. when the DOH talks about the daily account of cases, recoveries, and deaths. And know we still don't know much about it. There's a lot of talk about asymptomatic being rarely spreading, and only for the WHO to retract that the day after. And we have very little confirmation about reinfection. We don't know if a second wave will really be coming and as deadlier as the Spanish flu experience. And again, of course, the vaccine has yet to come, with 100 companies trying to compete and trying to race against time for that cure. All these informations are moving parts and bits and pieces of variables that actually dictates on the policy, national policy for prevention, where companies wants to comply. So while we are trying to manage our own crisis, the background is still very fluid. That's why we at Deloitte, we always talk about it not as a new normal, because it hasn't stabilized yet, but it's a next normal. Like personally, I thought it's like a moving target for everyone. And obviously, it's not just a health safety crisis. It's really a bigger economic crisis, with a recession almost imminent. And we hear our government officers talking about a recovery forecast, saying it might be a V, a W, a U, or an L, pretty much all the letters in the alphabet already. Let's go to the first page. And this is where I would like to really sort of like try to define what exactly does a BCMS entail. Sometimes we kind of loosely use this, kind of confuse one over the other. But on the next page, if you look, and I guess the benefit of uh, us all experiencing quarantine for about 3 months, we had to learn BCP already the hard way because we've already probably paid our salaries, paid certain overhead while at home. But this is actually what ECMS entails. It actually entails all the components, and this is the components of the emergency response plan, the light blue on the box. And this is pretty much the incident response plan. This is the plan where if there's an incident, this is how the company responds to that uh, particular incident. Now, if this incident becomes one that of crisis proportion, impacting our reputation, our financials, our profitability, even undoing our business model, then we have to activate a crisis management plan. Once we address the crisis, then we need to continue on our business, bounce back, and we have to activate our BCP. And how to do it? We have to activate our IT disaster recovery plan, because this is where we identify systems and applications that we chose, not exactly everything, to support our BCP. Next page. So I have here a particular survey that was conducted very recently in the first few months of the year, with companies already trying to address the COVID-19. And this is particularly peculiar to the financial services sector only because of the many sectors. This is almost always the sector that is quite advanced as far as their resiliency programs and business continuity plans are concerned. Go to the next page. So, so the key learning here, if you look at how the continuum of what happened, was where the productivity was very high, and after it hit the companies, it hit the countries. Really, the productivity really went low, disrupting just about everyone. And so, the key learning out of this survey was that everyone was just improvising on the fly. Everyone was just trying to activate their BCP, trying to make it happen, but apparently it's not really happening. That's why it's more like trying to uh, make it happen by using institutional memory, creativity, and plain hard work. Next page. And true enough, all of us has a plan, and Mike Tyson would always talk about this. Their opponents always have a plan till they get punched in the mouth. And pretty much all the countries and even the companies, we all got punched in the mouth by COVID. We were all taken by surprise. Next page. So what was the key findings of that particular Deloitte survey that was conducted out of 100 responses on that particular date, pretty much targeting the C executives of financial services, those who are BCP practitioners, was that they didn't anticipate, 59% actually said that they did not actually anticipate uh, pandemic-specific actions, only because of the ambiguity, the unique ambiguity of the COVID-19 as a crisis. While in BCP we talk about RTOs or RTOs, RPOs of 72 hours, 1 week, 1 month, we never really get to anticipate that the disruption would take 3 months and even longer. And we were scrambling to apply plans that are needed because there are certain precautions in a pandemic. You have special precautions for people who have it, and people who don't have it are really emotionally fearful for their lives. So it kind of had a hard time with contact tracing. As you probably know, and I'll talk about that later, contact tracing is probably as it's hard because the stigma of having it is sometimes even harder than having the virus itself. And I think that's why probably the the government of Singapore at some point were quite successful because they were compensating people who will volunteer that actually have a positive they are positive in the case. Yes. So this page says that while they all feel that 3/4 of those surveyed felt that they are quite fine with their plans, only 16% actually felt that that their plans were really working. And the gaps, as I mentioned, was about the uniqueness of the pandemic as a crisis and the shelter in place, which is we also call here lockdown or quarantine, that was really wreaking havoc in companies. like in a disaster, when you prepare for a disaster, you kind of say, okay, after the disaster happens, I probably set up my DR, run to the DR with the contractor. But here, you and the contractor can even go out, and you can only go out until probably day 60. Next page. So these were the key findings. Again, it was the findings was around the complications around extreme shelter in place having a global impact. Shifting thousands of associates to home-based work took actually several weeks, and in fact, some of them are not there yet. And the particular finding did talk about the major offshore facilities in India and here in the Philippines, where shifting to home-based work under crowded living conditions actually was not exactly the most ideal. Although we understand that certain BPOs were not allowed to have the work outside of the clean rooms, which we call them. Second finding was again the few focus. The plans weren't peculiar, focused on pandemic. And here they were quite confused what to use: building emergency response plan, their BCP, or the crisis management plan, because probably because of the duration and because of the emotional fear factor that is embedded on how to address this particular um, crisis. And I'll probably talk about the Deloitte Philippines crisis, and you will see how the dynamics of that particular case. Again, technology capacity related, very hard to supply the workers with laptops operating in home-based network access. Next page. Next page, please. GUPS found certain companies were kind of treating the health aspect of the concern. Some companies prioritizing the health safety of the clients and the employees, and because of the vastness of the crisis, it was very hard to activate the whole extended response team. Sometimes in a crisis, you only sort of like activate, say, the HR side of the response, but not the whole gamut of response team. So that was quite challenging. And the fifth one was because some companies wants to just make things happen. Like I would know certain food companies in the Philippines that because these are essential products, we just want to go through delivery and through distribution. And they said, can we limit the controls? Can we limit the audit later on? So it has become a challenge for auditors to sort of like monitor the process, and given the remote way of doing audits at the moment. So you kind of do it now and probably do the checkings later on. Next page. So I guess from how we develop BCMS, these was the learnings from the findings of the survey. On the first page, on the next page, there's really a need to shift from a scenario-based planning to an asset-based planning. And I heard a blue chip company talk very recently on a webinar that definitely pandemic was not even in their top 10 plan, a top 10 risk. It was probably on the 12th, third, only because of a recent SARS or Ebola that existed years ago. So it wasn't in their radar completely, but because their business continuity plans and crisis management plans were very centered around asset-based. Like, do we have the building? Can we use the building? Are our people available? So it talks about asset, which we call at Deloitte, we call it the BEF3, building, equipment, technology, human resources, and third party. So these components comprises the assets of the companies, and you kind of get to figure out which ones are operating 100% or which ones are almost at zero. And I also remember when I was consulting for a big blue chip company as well, where we all prepared for a very good big one earthquake crisis uh, management plan, only to encounter after 3 months of a big fire on their data center, and we all panic saying that that was a pretty good crisis management plan, but can we use it here? And obviously there were a bit of confusion. So that is really a message here, shifting from a scenario-based planning to a more asset-based planning. Next page. Very important as well to have a BCP updated. One of the findings in the survey I talked about was they felt that it was a bit outdated, and it doesn't show a harmonized, streamlined BCP. And that's just the function of a more disciplined way of having a BCP. You work on it, you craft it, you update it very often when the operations changes. Next page. And obviously the need for regular testing, and I'll probably emphasize this later on with a video of how do we do wargamings at Deloitte. But the expectation for a plan was to rehearse it, to have a bit of a muscle memory, as Renato Solidum, the FIVOX person head would talk about. The reaction to an earthquake has to be muscle memory, and that's the same for a BCP plan. People always ask me, Sir Chet, if you come up with a plan, do you really have to do it by the book? And I would always say that if a crisis happens, you could actually jump it, but at least the mentality of readiness is there. The mentality to pivot and get into something is more important than the individual BCP steps. So very important to have a testing. What are the testing? It can just be a walkthrough process. It can be a tabletop exercise. It can be a simulation. We all travel to the DR and run our key mission critical functions. And the fourth one is a wargaming where it's more realistic, where you secure the senior management and for 1 or 2 hours really make them simulate an event with certain injections of news as if it's really happening. So this is very important, regular testing at least once a year. Next page. Okay, and so crisis management, we're here at crisis management. It's not just, when we hear crisis management, we always think about getting a PR, probably because a very important component of crisis management is crisis communication. And, and it's not just about an incident rising to crisis proportion. Obviously, it's not just that. It's more about leadership. It's more about involving all the functions, an enterprise-wide initiative. And this is actually the dark blue in the BCMS function I talked about. Yeah, next page. So it's really coming up with an overall direction to sort of like respond to a very disruptive event, an event that impacts your reputation, impacts your financials, your profitability, your ability to operate when the crisis is already undoing the very business model where you operate, where it's already hitting the brand and the reputation of the organization. And I think very important to note in this particular day and age is with the advent of social media. Social media, psychiatrists would say, is really a double-edged sword. While we get immediate positive confirmation, there's also the possibility that you will get hit, you'll get impacted, your reputation, by a comment or just even by a fake news. So next page. So what are the types of crisis management events? And I guess some of these would resonate to all of you people, particularly in the industry, getting that news about HIV positive status being leaked online, probably of the highest of risk for companies like yourself. Cyber attacks has been very prominent at the moment. Next few pages. And I'll just go through what are the types of crises that are happening, misdeeds, the Enron case. Next page. And the Lehman Brothers case, technological, industrial, whether it's an IT failure at the Heathrow Airport, hopefully that doesn't happen to recent tomorrow. Confrontations, these are types of crisis management events that companies should adhere. Next page. And even typhoons that are not the usual, the black swan type of typhoons like the Yolanda. Next page. So we also had this Deloitte 2018, very specific to crisis management survey, and it gives you this following insights. Next page. It says that 60% of the organizations face more crisis today than 10 years ago. 80% of, in fact, dispatched their CMT in the last 2 years. Again, the highlights here is what are the type of crises they have felt. 46% cyber-related, safety incidents are 45%. Next page. What are the key findings? Again, they said that companies that experience crisis are they kind of learn from it and they kind of get to avoid it. But for those who experience the crisis, what were the takeaways? That 33% thinks that we have to improve the detection and early warning systems, invest more, 27%, in efforts to prevent it, and do more to identify potential crisis scenarios, run scenarios, probably simulations and tabletop testing, 26%. So those are the key highlights on this aspect. Again, here, that's this particular next page, sorry. Here, it talks about what are the key challenges in a crisis management. And it points out the highest at 24% is the effectiveness of leadership and decision making. And this is what we call at Deloitte speed over elegance. You have to be decisive. Obviously, in the first part of the crisis, you kind of weigh things and get the facts. But once the facts are out, the decision making has to be quick. Next page. And this is also a comparison between how management feels or confident on meeting their addressing the crisis and how prepared they are. The dark blue ones are their confidence to meet the different type of crisis, and the light blue ones is the level of how they actually conducted the simulation surveys. And if you look at it by minding the gap, there's really a big gap, particularly as far as regulatory related issues, corporate scandals, pretty small gaps in cyber attacks, which means probably that more companies are rehearsing on a cyber attack, probably doing cyber wargaming. But in all the other aspects, there's really very little simulation happening. Next page. Again, if you attack crisis management from a life cycle perspective, life cycle approach, a crisis doesn't just appear. In the first box here, it might be an identified risk of the company. So you kind of look at it, identify it, assess it every period. And then when it becomes an issue, then you address and try to prepare and prevent it. Then it would become a crisis of crisis proportions. And if you look at the continuum of a life cycle of a crisis, it's also an opportunity for you to set a new normal and a future state for the company. Next page. So I'll probably step back a bit and talk about our personal experience. As I've mentioned, we have the benefit of being the first organization to have a confirmed one. So a confirmed positive. And I remember distinctly, that was on March 6th. It was a Friday. I was sitting in my table and I got called by my CMP saying that we're trying to get hold of our colleague because we want to know whether he was the person that the DOH talked about. The age matches, the gender matches, and we're trying to get hold of him. And true enough, we got the confirmation that it was him. So, and we call, and he was called PH4. He was the first Filipino confirmed, and we call him internally at Deloitte as P1 because we were anticipating that what if we end up with P30, and that was really could be a disaster. So at first we immediately we turned on our CMT crisis management team meeting. We actually met, and the reason for the urgency because there is a mandate to contact trace, and that was where the challenge was to identify who actually got to meet him, and we have to run our CCTVs and identify who actually had the chance to meet him in the few days that he was there. And I was one of them who actually met him for a 15-minute meeting. So if he was the first Filipino, I probably one of the first few PUMs out there, and I'm kind of. So it was that afternoon of March 6th, and we have to make an announcement to all the employees only because we need to let them know that they have that the DOH and some of our medical folks will have to get hold of them if they were identified for contact tracing. And so we released that memo that night, that evening of that Friday, and true enough, by 9 p.m. the issue was already exploding in social media. Unfortunately, all these informations came out in the news, and we were prepared actually to declare it, but it was completely uncharted waters. We don't know what really how to do, and the country was really grappling to understand that particular. Um, and can you go to the next page? So overnight, I was a PUM. I locked myself in a room, told everyone not to bother me, to give me food every now and then. But for the meantime, I became an expert of the clinical definition of close contact. It wasn't how we understand close contact. It has to be 3 hours in a room, 2 hours in a room with the person, 15-minute in close contact conversation with the person. So I can distinctly remember from that time to the Monday evening, it was an intense 78 hours being chased by our clients as to how did we interact, who was the one respond, who did they meet, were the ones that they met, were did had an interaction with the person. So it was really so we had a bit of a backlash from quite everyone, particular our clients. We had employees who would call the office and call certain partners that they have been banished from the dormitories at 12 midnight or 1 a.m. We heard employees being told to leave a coffee shop only because the green dot of Deloitte came out, and so we have to address that. And very intently, you would feel that in a crisis, every moment counts. And in fact, I was looking at this, and it was a very intense 78 hours as we were trying to grapple, trying to address everyone's concern, people from our building, all our neighbors here in the building. So very important transparency to employees. And if you look at this particular Rappler news, while there were about 11% angry and 14% sad, 57% were afraid. And this is the time that no one even has a clue about COVID-19, and everyone was just afraid. Next page. So while we were all struggling with the backlash from clients saying that doesn't want to know about more about it and this and that, and doesn't want to, some of my proposals just canceled out. They don't want to meet us, they don't want to talk to us. But I think the tact we took, which is just to be full transparent to everyone, was also getting a bit of some good positive feedback, particularly in social media, saying that we were very forthright with everyone, and that was the announcement we came out. And to me personally, when I was responding to clients, giving them very specific things, that I met you Tuesday, I met the person Thursday, so I don't think there was a connection, and you shouldn't be afraid. But to me, it's really about being completely truthful and honest, and that's really my key takeaway. In a crisis, the more truthful we are, it's not exactly the good result you get, but at the end of the day, as they say, truth will set you free. Next page. So what were the key learnings out of that particular crisis? Automatic, we know who's the CMT. We run and schedule the meetings every day, even on weekends. Very well-defined communication strategy. It will be on the next page. Utmost transparency to everyone. We're not hiding anyone. We set up a 24/7 link to our employees because people are just being banished from their homes, dormitories. So we told HR, okay, someone will man 6 to 9, everyone, and we did that. And at Deloitte, we also have the daily status check. You have to turn on whether you are either negative or tested negative or never had close contact. Every day we ask them for the whole 3 months, confirm to us every day just to have that view. Active engagement of all stakeholders, very important here. We have to deal with the DOH, we have to deal with the police, we have to deal with the military. At that time, everyone was trying to scramble who that company that declared positive case. Next page. So what were the crisis leadership traits that we're trying to bring out here? The thing, again, the decisiveness, strong communication, strong team, well-defined priorities. But in Deloitte, we always emphasize the last one, which is lead. At the end of the day, particularly for this crisis, it's really lead from within and with the heart. A bit of compassion is very important. Next page. Yeah, and this is our sort of like tips for crisis communication. Media responses should be well vetted. In our case, it has to get vetted by our regional office in Singapore and even the global office. But you will be surprised how the turnaround is very quick. Few minutes, it has to come back and it has to um, carry that Deloitte message. Only one authorized speaker for the company, preferably the CEO, and you would probably see a certain airline when a particular brand of airline would crash, and the CEO, that particular CEO, would always come out and we always have very good positive response out of that. But in our communication strategy, even no one can speak even on a personal basis unless you're authorized. Monitor reactions, so we always encourage having a social media manager, get the feel. That's what we call risk sensing. Be sensitive about personal data, and in all our communications, there was no personal data being shared. In fact, we were even cautioned not even to say whether he's a female or a male. And in daily media updates, probably you need to really give them updates on a very consistent and a fixed time basis. And yeah, and all these communications has to have actions needed that should come from all these communications. Next page. And this one, I just would like to emphasize how important rehearsing the rehearsing for a crisis is. And this is a sample of the Deloitte crisis wargaming service. Video. Is there a video?
It's playing. It's not showing.
It's playing. Well, it's stopped. It's
Okay.
actually playing, but I don't hear the video. Can we repeat? But anyway, I can just talk about it if you can still hear me. This is a wargaming where we bring all the senior management, and this lady is the one that is the Deloitte is taking notes, trying to facilitate. But all these texts coming out were all prepared by the organizers to sort of like simulate a case where they're being asked by our regulators on a particular aspect and how to respond to it, and that's pretty much this video is all about. We'll probably skip that batch. We can probably watch that next time. But that's a very intense video, and it's very nice. So again, very important to rehearse crisis. And one of the findings in the survey is that they weren't prepared to respond to it. They probably need to. So it's not exactly setting a scenario, but setting what is the purpose of the wargaming. Next page. Next page, please. Can we just go to the key takeaway? I have two last pages just to talk about the key takeaway. As they say, never waste a good crisis. So from a Deloitte perspective, need to reinstitute the BCMS, update it regularly, rehearse often. As I mentioned, it's really more the readiness mentality over understanding what are the actual plan steps. If you need to do the actual plan steps, work on a playbook. It from a Deloitte standpoint, we managed the crisis because we're quite small, we're quite nimble, so we were able to navigate that action-oriented approach, proactive, transparent, leading from the heart. Again, it's uncharted waters. We're actually learning from history in real time, and we can use this moment to learn by documenting the good and the bad, and to come out stronger. Next page, last page. And managing a crisis while you're in it, topic is for companies, but we acknowledge the overlay of the bigger global national pandemic crisis that is very actively evolving, impacting the very core of our business. And I think this is also very important to note that needing also the awareness that there's also the internal stress, trauma, and the crisis that is also occurring in each one of us. And New York Governor Cuomo said it may be the PTSD of our generation. So with prayers and everyone's help, I hope these two shall pass. Thank you. Mom, you're mute. Unmute.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, thank you, Jet, for wow, you have personal experience on this, so that's quite heartwarming. But let's move on first to our panelists so they can share their thoughts on today's topic. We have two distinguished panelists. The first one is Florian Neri, more I think more fondly called Riza, who's our country's business continuity program manager for the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. So it's the major coordinator for private sector engagement, disaster risk reduction and management effort. She's an environmental and urban planner and a certified business continuity professional and teaches at the is a professor at the Disaster Recovery Institute International. She leads the PDRF's business continuity programs for MSMEs, corporations, and for critical infrastructure. So we are very privileged to have her on board as she has I guess, inside information how the government is responding. She is also a professional fellow at the Florida Division of Emergency Management, where she acted as the emergency planner for emergency support functions. And she's currently finishing her master's in disasters adaptation and development at King Colleges London, which is why she's there through the UK government scholarship program. So welcome, Risa. Later on, we'll have another IT professional, Rene Canlas. Good afternoon, Risa.
Hi, May. Thanks a lot. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Hima, for having me. Maraming salamat, Jet, for the invite as well. Now, let me respond to Jet's presentation by highlighting three main points coming from a private sector network perspective. And those three main points, I'd like to have the first point, reference a good one of a question that really got my attention from the list of questions that HIMAP actually sent us initially. So the first one would be, how do companies or what companies need to adapt in the next 2 years to survive this crisis? And let me relate it to Jet's point during the latter part of his presentation we that companies or organizations need to actually come up with a playbook. Let me quote our co-chair, Mr. Jaime Augusto Zubelda Ayala, by his statement on an April 25 or 25th article by the Philippine Star, that there is no existing playbook for this pandemic crisis. So us, as a private sector network, we Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, we have built one of the world's first emergency operations center. We have been preparing for disaster events, name it, typhoons, volcanic activity. We have responded to the Taal volcanic activity. But to be quite honest, we were also caught by surprise by this pandemic crisis. And again, quoting our co-chair, that there is really no existing playbook that might have prepared us for this kind of crisis. Nonetheless, but now that we are currently firefighting or responding how to address this crisis properly, I guess what organizations would also need to prioritize are actually three things. We based on Jet's talk on crisis management, it's always having that situational awareness. So having the organization constantly assess how is the current pandemic crisis affecting all aspects of the organization, and take note that we can't even talk about recovery in this aspect. It's not even, we're not even at the business continuation stage yet, or some organizations aren't even in that stage yet. So it's some organizations acknowledging that we have different resources, we have different capacities. We're still currently doing some firefighting in order to survive. So situational awareness is very important in constantly assessing how is this pandemic and how will this current crisis actually affect our organization. Next would be always being wary or always being conscious of what our stakeholders expect from us. So coming from the healthcare industry, it's you might have that industry awareness on what your stakeholders might expect, but business continuity as we know it, doing ISO 22301, it's very important that now our current business continuity plans need to align with what our stakeholders actually expect from us. That's why if you listen to most companies or even CEOs talked about business continuity as the buzzword now in this current crisis, you'd actually hear them being more concerned about how will the organizations respond to the changes when it comes to consumer behavior, to the ever-changing demands of their current stakeholders, and that will actually change. So when Jet actually talked about agility, that agility will need to focus on how your organization will be able to either pivot your business model or quickly and appropriately respond to the different or evolving needs of your stakeholders. And next would be, what boundaries does my organization actually need to set? Again, I go back to what our co-chair has been saying, that now this current crisis has actually obliterated the way we actually do our planning strategies. So from short term to medium term to even long term planning, right now it's always we would need to be very nimble with our planning strategies and planning horizon. And in that case, your organization would need to set clear boundaries. So when it comes to assessing your business models, do I need to fully digitize my business? Will I need to completely pivot and change the way my organization is actually doing business, particularly for the healthcare industry, in order for me to actually address the needs of my stakeholders? So that's how, those are three main points that I would also like to drive home in response to adaptability and survivability as one of the questions highlighted in the list of questions that we see from, or we have seen from the participants. Now, my last 2 points in response to Jet's presentation would be, I understand that business continuity had been a buzzword ever since this pandemic hit. Overnight, everyone became an instant business continuity planner. But in as one HIMAP, okay, because you're also performing, or you're a coalition. Okay, I guess what HIMAP would also want to assess or determine now is that whether as a collective, as one HIMAP, how does being part of HIMAP actually influence the risk perceptions about the pandemic of the individual enterprises or organizations that actually belong to the platform, and how this will actually shape the collective's response to this current crisis. I'm a firm believer of being part of a platform or being part of a network. So PDRF we have 80 plus member companies. We work with the government. We work with the humanitarian country team. And I see value when it comes to being part of a network, being part of, let's say, the Healthcare Information Management Association of the Philippines. But at the same time, There has when Jet talked about the recovery time objectives, meeting the business recovery objectives of each individual organization, HIMAP might actually want to also assess whether, as a collective, it can actually amplify current response strategies of individual organizations or strengthen these, and how does HEMAP actually influence the risk perceptions of individual organizations. That's very important because, again, I always go back to the concept that, or to the idea that we're not out of this crisis yet, and it's very important we constantly build trust within the association, within the platform, within the collective, and see how being part of this actually influence our risk perception, given that the pandemic is entirely new. It builds on uncertainty, and most of our organizations would actually need guidance on how to cope with this. And lastly, I go back to supporting the smaller enterprises that form part of your supply chain, or probably the distribution chain. We for those who have been working with smaller organizations or micro, small, medium enterprises, we know that the MSME sector comprise of 99.6% of all registered establishments in the Philippines, and they are actually the most hit, most affected sector by this pandemic crisis. We need to also ask ourselves, how are we also cascading resilience, business resilience within our supply chain? We're only as strong as our weakest link. So what are our efforts actually in helping the smaller enterprises, that our third-party service providers that work with our organizations, as they struggle to meet the demands of their customers, and at the same time struggle to even survive during the pandemic? That's why I'm, again, always asking or advocating for enterprises to help and collaborate, particularly for smaller organizations who might not necessarily have the access or resources when it comes to doing business, full-on business continuity management. And those are my quick or initial thoughts in response to Jet's talk on doing business continuity and practical crisis management, but at the same time, how I think HEMAP as an association would also be a value adding to the individual organizations when it comes to influencing and shaping how they respond to this crisis. Thanks a lot. I think May is on mute.
Um,
Yeah, thank you, Risa. Good insights. And then we now move to our next panelist. I hope you can reserve your questions right after the next panelist. So at this point, we have Rene Canlas, who's an IT professional with over 25 years of experience in software engineering, IT infrastructure management, operations, and consulting. Currently, he's the Chief Information Security Officer and Data Protection Officer at Point West. He's part of the Point West BCP team, and that is managing our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Good morning, Rene.
Good morning, May, and thank you for that introduction. I'd like to thank Jet and Florian. The presentation was really good, and you gave both gave very excellent insights. And I would like to share some of my own, my key takeaways from Jet's presentation. It really resonated with me. Is well, having a good team to manage your crisis. So for us, we've actually been managing crisis since we started operations back in 2003. Back then, the primary crisis we were experiencing would be the 20 or so typhoons that hit the Philippines every year. And the resulting effects of those typhoons would be, for example, outage in electricity, outage in internet connectivity. Your customers based in the US and elsewhere won't really, accept an explanation that you cannot provide the service because of these types of outages. So we learned very quickly that, disaster recovery planning, planning for prevention and not just for reaction is a very important thing to do as you're starting the business. So I guess that that kind of process over the past 17 years trained us all to be very, very prepared in terms of crisis management. It has certainly heightened my level of paranoia when it comes to events like what just happened. And I agree with Jet. Having a good team to manage the crisis is very important because decision making is key. If you delay a decision, that would cost lives and that could cost your business. So, fortunately for me, we have a very good team. We still have the same team we had since 2010 when we started our journey for ISO 27001, which we're maintaining up to now. So that has really that regimen or that practice has really helped us, we kept ourselves honest in terms of doing our BCP planning, doing our testing, and then doing the PDCA, plan, do, check, and act cycle, so that it improves over time. And just mentioning what Florian mentioned about there's no playbook for the COVID pandemic. We actually looked at what we did before. So when MERS-CoV happened, I think that was around 2012, we actually wrote down a series of policies and procedures for handling that should there be an outbreak and it would happen within the confines of our office. So when we started getting a hint of this pandemic was starting to shape up, we actually revisited that document and our team, our disaster team, reviewed it, and we asked ourselves, is this something that we can implement? What changes would need to happen? Of course, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy, and your plan is only as good until you get that first punch in the mouth. So it's really important that you roll with the punches, that you're listening. So everybody on the team was actually listening. We were sharing information with one another about what we were hearing. So my team was composed of diverse group of people from different departments of the organization. So we had PMO, we had security, we had finance, we had HR, and we were all focusing on certain areas. So it's good that my team has been together for a long time because we each knew our areas of responsibility. Mine was security, HR was of course people management, accounting would look at regulatory requirements and how do they continue their work during the pandemic. So whenever we met, we left that room, we all knew exactly what we needed to do, and we would execute it, and we would keep ourselves updated. I think since the lockdown happened, for the first 2 weeks or so, we were meeting regularly every day. Actually, we kept lines of communication open so we could just jump in and discuss something if there were new developments. We were trying to keep track of how the government was responding and what our obligations would be in order to comply with that response with the IATF task force and so on. So that's I think that worked well for us. And in terms of we're all service organizations, that means the people that we employ that work for us, they're really key in terms of delivering the excellent service our customers require from us. So it's really leading from the heart that really resonated with me, Jet, because I mean, these people, you know that they're also afraid for their health, they're afraid for the health of their families, but you need to motivate them to keep on working. So it was really, we made the message clear that we would not sacrifice their safety in terms of delivering the service, to a point where we had customers that were requesting that our people would report to their offices during the pandemic, and we had to firmly and gently say, I'm sorry ma'am, I'm sorry sir, we couldn't do that, but not to close the door. We would actively discuss with them the risks and try to find, ways, how do we find the win-win in terms of getting you the help that you need, but also not endangering our people in the process. So we were actively part of that. I've been in several teleconferences with customers so that we could explain our side and we could explore, how do we work through this situation. So the ecosystem of suppliers and partners, you really have to work together with each other to find, how do we now work together given the physical restrictions that we're now facing. And what Florian said in the last part of her talk about belonging to a community, that is so very important, and I agree with that, because if we don't belong to a community, we'll all be working on this alone. We don't have any way of validating what we're doing, if what we're doing is right or wrong. We don't have any way of raising our hands and asking for help. And I think belonging to a community is very important because this is basically our support group. This is where, and judging by the questions I've seen people ask, a lot of people really need help and validation, and sharing what we know works for us and learning from what works with other companies and other people. I think that's the essence of the community that we have. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rene. We'll move straight to the questions, and some of them have sent us the questions already. I'll start off with Jet. You did mention that during the actual experience of Deloitte, you had clients canceling meetings. So, how would you say, are there opportunities or additional clients that will come up during the pandemic? Or have you already had any experience, if you're allowed to say, any clients pulling out during this crisis?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, it was pretty temporary. Obviously, we all know that after that case, and I think lucky for us, the case in San Juan was officially what the DOH called as the first community transmission case, because our colleague actually flew in from Japan. So it kind of that news actually covered ours. And true enough, all the cases just exploded, and we ended up dealing with our clients again, and they appreciate the responsiveness of because clients were really asking us left and right on how to uh, give sort of like clarify our connections to the positive one. So true enough, our relationship bounced back. It went well, pretty well. They, in fact, they kind of connect to us to seek advice, because later in the months, some of our clients, in fact, had their first positive case, and they will reach out on how we responded to it. So we're back. In fact, I've been talking about this story already. So it's doing well for us at the moment, because we get to experience it, but we kept to our ideals of being transparent to everyone, and that helped a bit. Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned a while ago, insights from the survey was to shift from scenario based to asset based, update the BCP, and constantly test it. But in the short term, like in the next 2 years, what are your words of wisdom for companies to survive in the next 2 years?
But I think the discipline of still having it should still be there. I do remember that I once consulted for an insurance company having a BCP in place, and I saw the transition from one who just want to feel good and comply with the principle, to one where each one of them during the last day tabletop, having the mindset of a risk management mindset, that if this happens, then we can move to this office and this and that. So I think just continue on keeping that discipline of having a good BCP and rehearsing it. I think that remains to be there. As I mentioned, this is the time to pause and pick up what did well, like do a debrief of what went well or what's not working, and just work on it and see how we can improve on our existing plans.
Okay, thank you, Jet. Here's a question for Riza, since you work closely with the government and you're actually situated in another country. Do you think that the country responded quite quickly enough to the pandemic? And what is the government, um, aside from what we hear from PCOO, what should they be doing as well? I hope this is not recorded.
I know. I
We're on the
actually
spot.
check if it's being recorded.
We're on the spot, Lisa, but yeah.
All right. And no, I actually had to check if this is being recorded. No, but being, as wearing our PDRF hat and working closely with the government, and but still providing an objective assessment of how the government responded. I think the safest answer would be they responded in a way that reflected their current resources and capacities. So that's a pretty safe answer. But what the believe it or not, I'm always I'm always at the default mindset that we have to work with government. We have to work with public institutions. May you've been with the government for how many years? The government has its rough patches, but in this pandemic or this current pandemic crisis, it actually highlighted the role of trust in our public institutions. And I actually remember telling my colleagues working in the private sector network and seeing how private sector has actually highlighted our resources and capabilities to support the government. I'm also conscious of we're also conscious of how this would affect public trust when it comes to our institutions. And during a pandemic crisis, during a crisis that's so uncertain, it's very important that we don't really erode that public trust when it comes to our government, because they still play a major role when it comes to risk communications and telling our public what needs to be done. So again, my response would be they responded based on their current capacities and the resources at that time.
Okay. Is there any shortcut or tips that you could give, given that there are some costs that companies are to bear now? What is the most cost-effective way to respond to this pandemic?
Well, the most cost-effective way, if I go back to to Jet's main points would be, I think it's always maintaining that situational awareness, because that's how you would always come up with a what you call a quick response team that's also constantly planning, feeding the management that situational awareness, be it like on a monthly basis, quarterly, and up at the end of the year, and talking about the reasonably worst case scenarios, and then you plan accordingly. That's how you would allocate your resources. I guess I always go back to having or maintaining that situational awareness within the organization, so that you can respond accordingly, and at the same time allocate resources appropriately.
Thank you, Risa. Let's move on to our practitioner, Rene. Given that you mentioned you led by heart, having the employees, um, I guess, welfare at heart, can you share some best practices? How do you now remotely motivate and drive performance in the organization?
Okay, thank you, May. That was actually the primary concern as we moved from working in the office to working remotely. Productivity, monitoring productivity was one of the primary concerns. So we spent the first month actually just making sure that we're able to work as efficiently at home as it is with the office. And that entails, of course, adjustments in how we work so that we could maintain that efficiency. So we utilize. So I think what helped us in that aspect was that we were already operating a lot of our systems in the cloud. So we were actually ready to actually we could basically work anywhere because our systems were already out in the cloud, and we leveraged the collaboration features of the tools that we were using. So to do video conferencing, to do collaborative editing, and have those meetings. And we're still constantly looking for, like, for example, we're looking for a good replacement for the whiteboard dynamics, getting into a room, giving everybody pens and starting to write on whiteboard. So what's the digital equivalent of that? So we found some tools that we're testing right now because we want to give that experience back to people. Again, we're seeing that when, normal, the definition of normal isn't the same anymore, and we have to define what will be normal moving forward. And we chose to re-engineer the way we do business. Also, one thing that so aside from keeping regular touch points with the people, and our human resources team were very, very good at that. We were doing health checks. We were doing how are you doing with the work. We had a very responsive incident management plan where we were monitoring problems with connectivity. We had to figure out, for example, how to deliver new machines to people that had malfunctioning machines in the middle of a lockdown. So we had to find creative ways of doing that. Um, and then what we noticed was initially the people were very responsive. The first 2 weeks, they would say good morning to you. And then we noticed a kind of slowing down of that. They weren't as responsive as before. So we did the mood check. So as part of the health check, we now include how are you feeling right now? Are you feeling depressed? And what would probably be the reasons? Of course, within the bounds of data privacy, um, we wanted to address that. So we instituted some programs to help cheer the people up or help alleviate their concerns. So, for example, we have this what we call Thursday quarantine talks, where our people actually get the spotlight. So one of the teams would host the talk, kind of like SNL. They would host the talk, they would run the program, they would host the discussions, and then everybody would have a good time, and then we would chat about it. We would do games. I mean, people would offer prizes, and then so that people would participate. So I think we gained a lot of momentum, and we got a lot of positive feedback in terms of those types of activities. So it's really, how do you do social when we're all digitally apart? So that's one of the problems that we're trying to solve, and we're still finding ways of how to do that more efficiently.
Thank you, Rene. Back to Jet. There were questions on, I guess, more concrete actions to do for BCP or BCM. Do you think that companies should set up backup sites in the other island groups like Visayas or Mindanao?
Uh, that's that's a multi-million peso question. And when companies ask us if they need another separate DR site, we step back and say that it depends. It's not always the correct answer. But I think for your type of companies where you operate, it's very hard to really have a concentration in Luzon. I think that's one thing. Um, and when I was consulting for a big distribution utility in Manila, we did establish connections with utilities in Visayas and Mindanao, because we know that if something happens and the big one actually happens, it will really impact the whole of the NCR, which carries about 60% of the GDP, and there's no way for them to recover by themselves without the help of Visayas and Mindanao. For I guess from that particular scenario, yes, but it's very expensive. In fact, for Deloitte, we don't even have a separate. We have a token DR, but we already operated from a work from home basis even before COVID. So that's why the transitioning wasn't exactly hard. Yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Okay, and as I mentioned a while ago, in Chinese, crisis also means opportunity. Have you identified any concrete opportunities for HIMAP, especially for the HIMAP members? Do you see any new opportunities that they should be exploring?
Well, initially I was thinking that because we were early in the curve, we should also be first out of the curve as far as servicing our principals. But since we're a bit languishing also, like the Philippines, then I was thinking that probably we're not exactly doing well. When every time I kind of look at things, I always look at those that in an accounting parlance is first in, first out. China and Korea being first in, first out. So I kind of monitor what's happening there, but still, they hasn't really picked up well. So it's very hard to really predict what's the end game for this particular crisis.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we have, I think, 5 minutes before we move to the closing remarks. But anybody from the group can field in your questions. Just unmute. I think you just have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just to talk about just bit on the thing about mental health. Because of the experiences most of the Deloitte employees felt, at least on the first few days or first few weeks of the crisis, which was really being impacted. We already connected with a provider at the Makati Med, where we could do hotline calls for mental consultations, and and surprisingly, with this generation, the pickup was very high.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, and so we just continue with that, and now we're expanding that to a bigger regionals program for Deloitte. So we're there. Yeah.
I know Rene mentioned a while ago they do games and they do engagement programs. Since you have your own group, can you share any best practices coming from your end on how to help the employees as far as mental health is concerned? You're on mute.
Rene, you're on mute.
Probably, Anisha, it's something that you need to coordinate with your HR because they should be the ones leading this initiative. So what you do is you brainstorm and then you involve the community. What kind of activities would they like to do? Would they like to do like for example, a singing contest? So it's you end up basically with ideas coming from people, and you get a sense of what they respond to and what they don't like to do, and then it's an easy way to gauge attention because you know how many people are logging in and staying throughout that 1 hour activity that you've designed. So it's really designing activities that resonate with people, that highlight what they like. So for example, for later today, we're having a showcase of talent. So what skills have you learned during quarantine? So we're hoping that some people would showcase they've learned to draw, if they learned to cook. Probably a lot of us have learned to cook and cut my hair. My wife is now an expert at cutting my hair, so I'm probably saving a lot of money because of that. So we also highlight that sitting there doing nothing, thinking about your problems, you become more depressed. By getting up and suggesting what type of activities you can participate in, and having that community of peers, of colleagues who want to do that activity with you, it really helps a lot.
All right. May let me just also quickly respond, if I
Yes,
may,
please.
to the
Yes.
mental health concern. And I guess the battle cry for this year is really, or rather, the metric on how organizations will be judged is based on how we would actually be treating our employees. It can sound all fluffy and cuddly and stuff, but when we talk about mental health, I think the organizations would always need to step back and assess what are the pain points and what are the fears that actually our employees are harboring right now. So it's more of will I still retain my job? Will I need to go out actually to perform my work? Will my office require me to go out even though it's still unsafe? So it's really drilling down on those fears, and as organizations and even as one collective, one HIMAP, it's actually our role to address those fears and help our employees actually cope with the uncertainties that those fears actually present.
Okay, thank you. That was in. I think that's quite related to the next question, and this is addressed to all the panelists and including, of course, Jet. In the new normal, where many will continue to limit exposure and perform work, what should we be watchful for the people, for the organization, for clients and other stakeholders? What do you think are the items that we should be looking for, critical ones?
Um, I'd like to take a stab at that. I think we should start looking for opportunities because as we all know, disruption comes with a lot of opportunities. So if we're only looking at the sorry state of our business and how our business model isn't working anymore, we're not looking at the silver lining in the cloud, which is, I mean, we can all base it from our personal experience. Delivery services need a lot of improvement. Order management systems need a lot of improvement. So there's a lot of things that are just waiting for people to say, "Hey, I can solve that problem," and then invest time and effort to deliver it. And you have a lot of customers, and you're actually basing it on your. I guess the thing with COVID is that we're all in this together. We all have personal experiences that we can relate to. It's not something that's happening in a remote island or in a different country. We're all in this together, and everybody's experience is valid, and then why not capitalize on it and look for the opportunities there?
Thank you, Rene. Jet or Risa, you can also share your thoughts on what are the critical areas that we should be watching out for.
Well, I'm looking at this from an angle of, again, from a mental state perspective. They always say that they expect like the psychiatrists and the psychologists are expecting like a wave of mental problems eventually because everyone now is just operating by himself. And in fact, there's what we call like getting tired of quarantining yourself as well. So everyone probably just want to get out. So so yeah, we probably expect that and to come, and we have to probably that's probably the next wave of risk and issues that we need to address. Uh, but I agree with Rene that the only thing working for everyone at the moment is that the company is not the only one trying to bounce back and recover. Everyone is. The problem in BCP is when you're the only one and everyone's fine, and therefore you need to bounce back immediately. But we're all in this together. We're almost at the same boat. When we compare our sports folks here with UK, the US, we're all in the same state, and that in a way helps. But again, we need to like for companies to really pivot and see where can I probably position my company at the moment. And see some silver linings that we could probably adopt in the meantime that we are experiencing the crisis.
Thank
Uh,
you, Jet. Yes,
May
Risa.
Sure, no worries. Roger's question on the new normal or the next normal, let me contextualize it in the perspective of not being blindsided mainly by COVID, because the next normal is actually acknowledging that we're going to live with this pandemic, with this virus, up until we find actually a vaccine and have it accessible. So that means that our next normal is the default COVID plus other scenarios. And let me contextualize it in the sense that we are now entering monsoon season. We're entering typhoon season. An earthquake might actually happen. A major disruptive event might actually happen. So again, I go back to the point of having that situational awareness, constantly having that situational awareness that the next normal is COVID plus another scenario, and being more comfortable imagining reasonably worst case scenarios compounded by the pandemic. So that's something that we would need to actually live with.
That's the concept of complex disasters.
Right.
Actually, we're looking at the same thing, and we're looking at how do we cope with rolling blackouts and internet outages, because our ability to work from home relies on having power and having internet connectivity. So that's the next challenge that we're trying to figure out how to fix or how to resolve.
It's
Okay.
really rainy season, and we don't expect at least hopefully water shortage in the near term. Hopefully.
All right. I think we're running out of time, much as there's so much real life, I guess, contributions as to how to manage this crisis. Thank you very much, Jet, for the great presentation and the personal experience that you have shared. And of course, thank you, Riza, for the expertise and also actual learnings from Rene's point of view. So thank you very much. And at this point, we'd like to introduce, to close today's session, is my dear boss, or my dear previous boss, Ben Coronel, the chairman and board of trustee of HIMAP and chairman of Point West.
Yeah, good
Good afternoon,
afternoon.
Ben.
Yeah, good afternoon, May, and thank you. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be with you in any event. And thank you for hosting this particular event. And thank you too for a wonderful presentation, Jet, and the reactions from Lisa and Rene. Maybe before I go to my other points, let me respond to Lisa's call to action from HIMAP. I know she said that at this time, what is HIMAP doing with regards to making sure that our members are actually well well assisted. So I think the first thing that we're working on would be the regular webinars. If you notice, this is our ninth webinar since we started our lockdown. So it's really sharing. Oops, oops. Can you hear me? Okay. So actually, it's we have held this webinar sessions to be able to share not only the first-hand experiences of our partners, but also in terms of creating or sharing the best practices that a lot of companies would have implemented. No? So that's one. Second thing that we are working on right now is really working on the demand side as well as capacity, knowing that these two things are actually being hit right now. No capacity because we really need to check on other services that we need to work on. So there are training programs that are being worked on right now, being planned, be implemented this month. On the demand side, we are working with the government. So instead of the trade missions that we have been doing in the past, wherein we go out and visit the country, now we would be having trade, sort of a trade mission on a virtual mode. So this would be, I think, towards the latter part of June. So this is really introducing again making sure that the market is ready to really give out more services, more work to the Philippines. No, so we're doing that in cooperation with the government. So we're trying our best to do our share in terms of making sure that our member companies are actually assisted in this really difficult times, because we know that some of our companies have really shut down, some have laid off people, etc. So we're trying to help in our own little way. So that's in terms of HIMAP reacting to the need of the time. Now going back to what had been discussed, I think um, it's actually when we talk about crisis, etc. We have always been exposed to BCP, no? As I mentioned earlier, we always talk about BCP, not knowing that it's a whole wide slew of BCMS, no, which comprises, which actually covers from emergency response to crisis management to BCP and IT disaster recovery, as Jet has mentioned. Now, the sad thing right now is that all four components are all we don't even know right now where we are, because everything in this particular pandemic is facing us. So that's where we are starting on a very difficult course. But I guess, as mentioned by Jet and the other panelists, practicing for readiness, right? Like testing once or simulation actually helps because of the muscle memory that is needed when things actually happen. There's no time to really recall and or get a playbook and step by step process, work on it. So it's really muscle memory that would help you out in terms of coping. But at the end of the day, yes, crisis management is all about communication, 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 and leadership. And I like what Jet mentioned. It's leading from within or leading from the heart. So I think I think everyone in this particular session takes that particular message really seriously. So and I hope we all lead our organization with a heart and be able to cope with this particular crisis situation or pandemic, and we will overcome. So I guess that's all for me today, and have a good day, and thank you again to everyone who participated in this particular event. Good afternoon.